bookworms, and welcome to the Book Up. I'm your host, Verdell Walker, and I'm so excited you're here. Each week, I dive into my latest reads and share my honest, unvarnished opinions, all in 15 minutes or less. So sit back, get cozy, and let me give you the Book Up. Today's book is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Moniquill Blackgoose. It's a YA fantasy with a bit of steampunk, published by Penguin Random House. The print edition is 528 pages, and it's also available as an eBook and an audiobook. Here's the publisher's summary. The remote island of Masquapog has not seen a dragon in many generations, until 15-year-old Anequs finds a dragon's egg and bonds with its hatchling. Her people are delighted, for all remember the tales of the days when dragons lived among them and danced away the storms of autumn, enabling the people to thrive. To them, Anequs is revered as Nampeshiweisit, a person in a unique relationship with a dragon. Unfortunately for Anequs, the English conquerors of her land have different opinions. They have a very specific idea of how a dragon should be raised and who should be doing the raising, and Anequs does not meet any of their requirements. Only with great reluctance do they allow Anequs to enroll in a proper English dragon school on the mainland. If she cannot succeed there, her dragon will be killed. For a girl with no formal schooling, a non-English upbringing, and a very different understanding of the history of her land, challenges abound, both socially and academically. But Anequs is smart, determined, and resolved to learn what she needs to help her dragon, even if it means teaching herself. The one thing she refuses to do, however, is become the meek English miss that everyone expects. Anequs and her dragon may be coming of age, but they're also coming to power, and that brings an important realization. The world needs changing, and they might just be the ones to do it. To Shape a Dragon's Breath has been on my to-be-read list for a while, and I'm glad that I finally got around to it. Dragons are definitely my jam, so that immediately piqued my interest when I read the book's summary. It's also written by a First Nations author, so I was really eager to support Miss Blackgoose in that way. I didn't pick it up for a long while because I'm kind of tired of the whole magic school or dragon school concept as a genre, but when it popped up as available through the Libby app, I took the plunge. So let's talk about the setting first. The world that this is in is a thinly veiled version of our own, kind of a Victorian England type world with some very strong Scandinavian elements. English, yeah, you get it. The other main setting is among the islands where the Indigenous people live, mainly Masquapog, I hope I pronounced that correctly, where Anequs and her family hail from. When I was reading the book, these islands felt very much like what I've read about tribes and villages in New England. And after doing some research, I learned that Blackgoose, the author, is an enrolled member of the Seekonki Wampanoag tribe. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This tribe is a Native American tribe with ancestral territory that spans parts of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So I was spot on there. The English are really some terrible people as a whole. Like, they're racist, narrow-minded, shallow, and mean-spirited. Not all of them are villains, but almost all of these characters are lacking in integrity and basic human empathy. Even the school's headmistress, who takes in Anequs and another Indigenous student named Theod. She's convinced that English culture is superior and is necessary for quote unquote civilizing Indigenous people. The racism that Anequs is called to endure had me shaking with rage at times. These people that she's around are obsessed with hierarchy and status and social rules. And I think I felt just as tired reading about them as Anequs did dealing with them. So back to the Scandinavian influence. Story time. A few years ago, I took a genetics test and I found Danish ancestry in my results, which shocked me. I did some research and I found that Denmark actually had a presence in Africa, specifically on the Gold Coast, which is present-day Ghana, through its colonial possessions and trading post. Denmark, Norway, and I think it was a unified kingdom at the time, controlled the Danish Gold Coast, which was a significant hub for the transatlantic slave trade. And this area was eventually sold to Great Britain in 1850. I think Sweden was also involved in a lot of the slavery that was going on at the time. Scandinavian PR is unmatched. Like today, we know them for Hygge and H&M and IKEA and minimalist fashion and all the things, but they have largely escaped the tar and feathering that other European nations that engaged in the slave trade have gotten. Funny that. And of course, these countries are also revered in white supremacist circles as pure white Aryan paradise, like the whole Viking reference thing. And in fact, some of the key antagonists in To Shape a Dragon's Breath are called the Ravens of Jotun or some such, which is clearly a reference to Odin, the king of the Norse pantheon. All of that to say, good on you, Miss Blackgoose, for incorporating that into this book. But I digress. Let's talk about what makes this book special. First, I really liked Anequs. She is a teenager, but she's wise beyond her years. She trusts herself. I think a lot of this maturity comes from her upbringing and being an elder sister who also takes care of her younger siblings. She routinely questions the systems around her without being reckless or self-righteous. She is thoughtful, observant, and you can really feel the weight of her responsibility to her people, even as she's thrown into this completely foreign colonial institution that denigrates her as a savage. What stood out to me about Anequs is how grounded she is in her own culture, her own worldview. She is not trying to assimilate or earn the approval of the English Dragon Academy. She is there to protect her dragon, Casaqua, her community, and to learn what she can on her terms. That kind of clarity is rare in any protagonist, let alone a teenager. It made her voice feel really refreshing and self-possessed, even when she was out of her depth. Anequs also rejects the social hierarchy of the English, and she goes out of her way to befriend a black maid and seamstress at the school, who is essentially an indentured servant. The maid's name is Liberty, which is a bit too on the nose, if you ask me, but that's a minor quibble. If I have one nitpick about Anequs, it's that sometimes she felt a little too perfect. She's a wonderful character, but we rarely see her shaken, not until her tribe is threatened with physical violence later in the book. She's very self-assured, but, we don't see a ton of emotional growth in her, and that makes her journey feel a bit static at times. And that observation brings me to Theod, who is the other Indigenous student at the school. He is an interesting foil to Anequs, and he does go on an emotional journey that I honestly felt was more compelling than Anequs at times. Theod has been at the school for much longer than Anequs has, and you can feel how much that time has shaped him, or more specifically, has worn him down. A dragon chose him by accident, and if it wasn't for the intervention of the school's headmistress, Theod would have been hanged, which is horrible because he was a child at the time. He is clearly smart and capable, but he's also someone who has had to learn to survive by conforming. And I think a lot of people of color will really identify with that. Theod knows how to play by English rules. He knows how to smooth out his identity to make himself more acceptable to his instructors and peers. Anequs, by contrast, she arrives with a strong sense of self and a deep connection to her culture. She is not interested in shrinking herself to fit into a system that's designed to erase her. And I just want to give some background on Theod. It's like this boy was the child of a mother and father who were killed in a massacre by colonizers. So he was taken away from his culture very young. So unlike Anequs, he did not have the opportunity to be immersed in and steeped in the culture that he came from. And, their contrast really drives home one of the book's core themes, is that colonized people are not all affected or even respond to that colonization in the same way. Theod is not a traitor. He's not a bad person. If anything, he is a survivor. Again, like I said, his parents were murdered by the English in an uprising on another island. And he has been shaped by years of subtle and not so subtle pressures to assimilate. When he meets Anequs, she challenges him and also introduces him to his culture for the first time. Before he met Anequs, he never really thought of himself as Indigenous, or Anequi, as they call it in this book. I try not to use that word because to me it kind of felt like a slur, so I'm just going to say Indigenous in this review. Another thing that I liked was the communal atmosphere of Anequs's tribe. It was really special. You see everyone taking care of everyone else, and it was great to see glimpses of her tribe's culture in their food, clothing, and festivals and the like. What I really liked was that we have some neurodivergent representation in this book too, in the form of one of my favorite side characters, Sander. Sander is one of the few English characters who is wholly accepting of Anequs, and he tries to be her friend and to be kind to her from the very beginning. He is clearly autistic. He fidgets, which is one of the first times I've ever read about that in a fantasy novel, and he uses all kinds of soothing tactile tools to control his fidgets. He's sensitive to fabrics on his skin. They chafe and itch him. Sander is verbal, but sometimes he blurts things out and talks in run-on sentences, especially when he's nervous. He prefers to write his thoughts on a tablet, where we can see that he is very eloquent and sensitive. He was definitely one of my favorite characters. Now, let me dive into a few of my quibbles with this book. First, the dragons, which were the lure for me, but they are more ornamental here than characters in their own right, and they're largely personality free, with the exception of Cassequa, who is Anequs's dragon. If they were any other magical creature, the story would largely have been the same. What I did like was that Anequs sees Cassequa as a partner, as an equal. She definitely feels that she belongs to her dragon. Cassequa definitely felt the most unique of the dragons, which is not surprising. I love how much time we get with her as a hatchling and watching her grow up. The length of the book was also a problem at times. At the beginning, we get a deep dive into the book's magic system, which is really a veiled form of chemistry and algebra. I'll be honest, bookworms, it made my eyes glaze over a little bit. These little differences threw me at first, and I honestly felt that they were unnecessary. Also, the last few chapters of the book were a little bit more tell than show. So for my final rating, I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I took off a star because Anequs's relative lack of emotional change and development was a ding for me, and I also tend to like my dragons as sentient beings rather than just animals. The info dumping with the chemistry and the academic subjects at the school were also another ding, as well as a book length. But on the whole, I think this book is so underrated. It won a slew of awards, including the Nebula Award for YA fiction in 2023, and it's so well deserved. The sequel to Ride a Rising Storm is scheduled to be released on January the 27th, 2026, and it is definitely on my wish list. If you like dragons and feisty heroines, I highly recommend picking this one up. It's YA, but it has definite crossover appeal for adults. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you want to read today's book, I've included shoppable links in the episode description. I'll earn a commission if you make a purchase. Thanks for supporting the show that way. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave me a rating or a review, and if you have book recommendations, drop them in the comments on my latest post over on Instagram at @thebookuppod. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time on The Book Up.